Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 38. With us is Premee Mohamed, the highly acclaimed speculative fiction writer and author of the widely successful Eldritch horror novel Beneath the Rising, which will have a sequel coming out early next year called The Broken Darkness. We are excited to have you here, Premee. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the invite.
So for some of the people who might be listening or watching, might be listening or watching this, who might be unfamiliar with your background, you have 3 books out. You also, as a last count, you have 35 short fiction works out as well, I believe.
Yeah, something around there. Probably if you include reprints and stuff. Yeah. So, yeah, not too bad for only being publishing for about 4-ish years.
Yeah. And then we'll talk a little bit later about how you just like your writing method and things like that as well. But first, you want to just kind of give people a bit of a background of how you got into writing, and you do have a journey, and we'll talk about that. As I said, we have. I was just talking to Premee before we went on the air that I have been binge listening and binge reading all of her interviews. So I know the answer to this, but I want to see what the listeners and viewers of how you got into it, how you got into writing, and then from there we'll talk a bit more about your books. So yeah.
Thanks so much for the invite. The whole how did you get into writing thing? I think people are supposed to say, I've always wanted to tell stories. Well, I've always wanted to lie a bunch. I like lying. And I always wanted to write it down. And my parents told me that I started reading when I was about 2. And I can't gainsay this, right? Like, you can't go back in time and audit anybody to check. I've had various aunties and uncles confirm that this was the case, but what if they're lying to make themselves look good or something? But I can't really remember a time when I couldn't read or write. And as soon as I got into books, that was what I wanted to do, was make more of those. And I think I've told this anecdote in another interview, but it's still kind of funny. I wrote my first book when I was like 8 or something like that. It was a picture book. It was about a cat who I think becomes a pirate because somebody steals his tail or something like that. And this was during a period when we had some kind of iffy childcare. And so instead of going to after school care for, I don't know, maybe a year or something, I often ended up at my dad's office. And he worked at the time for the city of Edmonton. So unfortunately, this middle-aged guy and his coworkers had to look after this 8-year-old child. And one way to do that was just by giving me a bunch of office supplies and just pushing me off into one of the offices. And so that little book got illustrated with these terrible, smelly drafting markers that were like mostly alcohol and probably killed a bunch of brain cells. And they also taught me how to use like letraset, the kind you had to cut out and then burnish on with a wooden stick. So that was kind of where all that began. And I never really stopped. I jumped around a little bit. I thought, I want to do comics. I want to do poetry. I want to do short fiction. I don't know. I settled on novels when I was maybe 12 or 13 because it seemed like the form that my writing was just kind of naturally evolving towards. And I would just fill up notebooks and notebooks. And then after I started making a little bit of money babysitting, I bought a computer and very excited to install WordPerfect and stare at that bright blue screen with the white lettering until I lost all color vision and couldn't tell what was happening, and save my stories to the 3.5-inch discs. And never stopped, I guess, is how the writing journey is going.
And you mentioned in the previous interview that your book Beneath the Rising, you wrote that, we said, like in 2002 or 2000. You had the idea 2002 or 2004, correct?
I started it probably in about 2000.
Okay.
So about second year undergrad of that degree, and finished it the year I graduated, which was 2002.
Okay.
So people complimenting me on how realistic it feels for the characters to be using like Netscape Navigator and stuff. I'm like, yeah, that's I didn't take that out. I was going to take that out, but my editor said to leave it in.
And so then you went, and so, but the book was published in 2020. So what was the process of, obviously life happened, so you had that 18-year span, so besides that point, talk to us about what was that point where you said, I'm going to get this published. What was that last part where you, was it like you rediscovered the book, or did you say, all right, this is, or there was a point where you've always trying to think about getting it published, or how did that happen where that genesis of the publishing part happened? I'm really curious.
Yeah, I'm still wondering about that myself, as it turns out, after learning how publishing works. But I had never actually thought about getting any of my stuff published. I just wrote for myself so that I could have something interesting to read. And it was kind of one of those eternal hobbies, just always having 10 or 12 things on the go that I could work on or edit or noodle around in or draw some pictures of or something. So it was kind of my private little, let's keep Premee sane hobby during school. And boy, there was a lot of school back in the day. Publishing to me was something that sort of happened to other people. I was just writing because I liked to write. And I was also, trotting along the path of a science career. And I think kind of the tipping point, sort of, as dramatic as it sounds, maybe somebody would like to make a movie of this or a short film or something. But I was diagnosed with a couple of fairly serious and what they call progressive, which sounds really nice, but actually is not, conditions in 2014, 2015. So as we kind of worked our way through what I ended up calling Diagnosapalooza, while they tried to figure out exactly what condition it was I had, and they finally settled on something that had the word heart failure in it, which is always a bad sign. The kind of general consensus among my medical practitioners was, we're going to keep an eye on this, and we're absolutely going to do the best we can, but write faster.
Oh, geez.
So I'm not going to say I panicked and started looking for literary representation the next day. But it did occur to me that whatever it was I was trying to do with my life had a small missing piece. And that missing piece was the hobby that I'd had for decades, sort of taking its proper place in how important it was to me. And maybe it could be important or meaningful to someone else as well. I'd spent, I was whatever in my mid-30s at that point, and had spent however long going to school and getting jobs and working for, labs and government and doing consulting and working at a nickel and cobalt refinery and working in government, and just so focused on that stream of things that I thought there kind of wasn't room in my life for anything else. But if somebody is going to give you a deadline, even if it's kind of a soft deadline and they don't know how it's going to end, you feel like you need to do something with it. So I think that's where that came from. So I started with short fiction because, hey, short fiction pays right away, which is great. But started thinking, well, if I was going to aim at a book, if I started now, I could be finished something in the next couple of years or decade. But I've got a trunk, and the trunk is full of stuff. Let's dig around there and see if there's anything finished that I could polish up a little bit and use that to query with. And that ended up being Beneath the Rising.
So was there any point that you decided, because this is a fairly, Beneath the Rising, as I said, came out last year, was there any idea for you to ever say, I'm just going to self-publish this? Or has this always been a direction for you to always find a publisher for this work?
No, I don't think I was thinking about it at the start. I did, not being all that bright. I just did some Googling, how do you get a novel published? And I didn't want to self-publish. It sounded very, I don't want to say scary. It sounded intimidating. It sounded like it called for skill sets that I didn't have. And I thought it would be good for someone who was just getting their feet wet to try to go the trad pub route, as a first cut until I kind of knew how things worked. This is a good running gag because nobody in publishing knows how things work. The people in publishing certainly don't know how things work. The authors know even less. So after the book deal, I actually did end up self-publishing something on my own just to see how hard it was. With my agent's blessing, I did ask his permission. But having somebody hold my hand through the process was definitely the goal with a first cut at publishing. Yeah.
And was that self-published? The book you mentioned, was that the Apple Tree Throne? Was that? Yeah. Okay. Because that's available in audiobook, but also as a Kindle, as a e-reader as well.
Yeah, about, I don't know, a year and a half or 2 years or something after it came out, we had some interest from an audiobook publisher, and they were like, send it over, and maybe we'll produce it. So I ran it past my agent, and we sent it out, and I was very excited to hear it in audio, because that would not have happened on my own.
Now, let me ask you this, though. So it's almost as if, like, with the audio version, do you feel as though, as the author, you kind of gave away a little bit of the ownership of it, where it's like, that's not what I kind of meant with, when listening to it, it's like, that's not the indentation I was hoping for? Or do you feel as though that the voice that is being narrated in the audiobook sounds like the voice in your head as you read it?
I think they got the accent pretty good. And again, I'm Canadian, I'm not English. It's a very English book. Like, it's an English book. I don't even know how I dared try to write a book so English. But I think they got the accent down. I really like the narrator, and I think he puts a lot of the emotion that I was hoping for in it. If I did have a quibble, it would only be something like, he sounds a little older than the narrator of it. But, how do you tell age with voices anyway, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So talk to us a bit about, and as you say, your book, Beneath the Rising, has critically acclaimed. I mean, you're just like, review after review, and I think you said in a previous interview, like, I don't look at the reviews, I don't see it, like, I don't stay away from it, and I'm sure there's probably advice you get from other authors who probably said that.
That is 100% advice from other authors. When I announced the book deal, people marched in, like, holding big signs that said, "Don't read the reviews." I was like, okay, I don't know you, but I will take that advice.
So talk to us a bit about just like, the premise, but also, as I said, it's kind of this extra, kind of extra dimensional kind of horror, where the protagonist is, this with a you throw in a bit of your background with the science piece to it, and I remember reading in one of your previous interview, you mentioned that the main feel of it was supposed to have religious connotations to it, and you felt like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm kind of, as I say, I listened to like a lot of your interviews, so I'm trying to, they're all kind of meshed together. But one of them that you said it was easier because it was easier to kind of create your own mythology inside of this, instead of relying on something already established. And so, as a writer, compared to, say, fantasy novels, or compared to sci-fi, where you have to create worlds and different languages and stuff like this, writing something like this is like you've kind of had to create rules, because it kind of takes place in our world in a way. So how did that work as building that? Talk to us a bit about how you created the background for the story.
Okay, well, first disclaimer, when you're 20, you don't know anything about world building. So I was making up the entire thing as I went along. But yeah, as you said, originally, because I just come from 12 years of Catholic school, which, as discussed, when you have one Hindu parent and one Muslim parent, and you go to Catholic school for 12 years, your ideas about religion get a little bit muddled up, I think is the word we're looking for. So I had just come out of 12 years of Catholic school, and the disappointing thing I found about Catholic school is that they don't teach you the interesting Catholic history, and they don't tell you about demons and exorcism and Satan and stuff. It's more, they kind of sit you down and go, well, the Pope is infallible and don't get syphilis. So thanks for 12 years of that, St. Albert. But it did feel, in terms of the world that I wanted to build, specifically the villains that I wanted to build, they came with all this, I don't want to say baggage. They came with all this emotional baggage. They came with all this historical baggage. There's only so much you can do with traditional style demons and angels and the whole historical dichotomy that's got thousands of years of very intelligent people in many, many fields writing about it. So I did a bunch of research about the devil in history and literature, which I think actually is the title of one of my books. The roles of angels and possessions and exorcisms. And finally, I was like, you know what? This is fun, but not flexible enough for me to make the characters make the choices that I need them to make it a really nasty, difficult story, Like with devils and angels, everybody kind of knows where you stand. With extra-dimensional horrors, nobody knows where you stand. The horrors don't know where you stand. The kids don't know where they stand. So I had gotten in a bit to kind of the Robert E. Howard school of Eldritch monsters, which was kind of fun. I didn't really get into the Lovecraft stuff until I was in my 20s, actually, after this book was done. So part of the polish that it took for sending it out to query was ripping out all the stuff where I tried to make Satan and devils do stuff and replacing it more or less whole cloth with these things that were just nasty and ancient, and the kind of cosmic horror antagonist that has several mythoses. I don't know what the plural is. Mythoses. But all of those leave room for infinite numbers of unnamed creatures. It even says in all these people's stories that they don't even know what their awful evil pantheon is comprised of. They don't know what's out there. They don't know who's competing with them. They don't know who their enemies are. They're just out there being evil and doing their thing. And I thought, hey, that's useful.
So how much did you notice of any rewrites or any, as you mentioned a little bit, kind of insinuated a little bit earlier, that book was written 18 years ago and it had about 18. And so how much of it was a rewrite? How much of it did you say, wow, I didn't know what the heck, how much of it are we proud of, like, that was really smart? And how much of it we're like, if I wrote this today, I never would have thought of that. I'm kind of curious of looking at it through the lens, because you have the benefit of looking at this book through a lens of 18 years.
Yeah, when I dug it back up and polished it up, I was like, okay, this is good because it's something I wrote the end on. Is any of it salvageable or is it all terrible? I think, honestly, in the end, I ended up keeping about 85% of the original writing. About 15% was replaced in my first editing pass prior to querying, and in the pass that I did after my agent looked at it, after he signed me, and in the pass that my editor and I did. So it's still surprising to me. Sometimes I flip through it and I'm like, okay, I'm sorry, book. It is very, very clear that a 20-year-old with no writing education whatsoever wrote you, but I think you're still okay for what you're trying to be. And I do find it surprising, actually, yeah, that so much of the book is original from those old drafts, the ones that had to be transferred off the floppy disks and onto USB sticks, and then off the USB sticks and into Google Drive. And those documents had gone a long way. And of course, you have to try to recapture that voice to write a second book, because it was a 2-book deal. And I didn't even think of that until we made the deal. And then I was like, oh, I wonder if I can do that again. That sounds hard.
And I saw in one of your blog posts that this second book had a deadline to it. Like they said, it has to be done by this time. And do you, now that you've written, and we'll talk a little bit about A Broken Darkness shortly, but has this opened you up for more stories in this world that you've created as well?
I guess there's kind of 2 answers to that. So the sad answer is that it was only a 2-book deal, so really there's only going to be 2 books. But the more fun answer is that between the time when I was when I began to query and when I got the book deal, I was still writing short fiction. So actually, there's a lot of references to the novel in a lot of those short stories, and devoted fans will pick them up. And sometimes it's something very, very tiny. Maybe just a single mention of a Chambers Lab affiliate or something like that. But I thought, even if this novel never sees the light of day, because a lot of people were telling me, don't get your hopes up. First novels, or the novel that you query with, may not get you an agent. If you do, get representation, it might not be picked up by a publisher. Don't stake everything on one book. And I was like, yeah, but I've written like 20 books. I don't care about one book. So it's nice to not have that, I guess, attachment to it. But it was fun to sprinkle things in the other stories. And that also actually kind of fed into the second book, where I thought, hey, you know what would be fun is if we take some of those clues and do something with them.
Yeah. Do you have, in all the other books here, are you having fun with the idea of maybe having all these things? Is this a shared universe for you? Like, do you have all these things? Is there something intertwined with all of your other writings? Or anything like
there's a couple. There's a couple of books where it's clear that it does happen in the same version of Earth that has Johnny and Nick's story, but without giving too much away, the second book changes some of those and makes some of those impossible and makes some of them possible. So as Nick would say, it's a quantum. Yeah, figured it out. Don't worry.
and so, and I know obviously your second book, it's already been written, and it's waiting for it to be published in March. What's coming up now? Are you looking at something else? Are you going to stick with this Eldritch horror genre, or are you looking? I can't even say it's my Vermont accent probably. But anyway, are you looking at anything else more to go towards as what the publishers are, as they say, they couldn't kind of fit you into a specific genre? Are you leaning more towards, I want to stay in this field? Are you looking at, do you have other ideas of larger worlds like fantasy worlds?
I don't know. And that's actually a very good question in and of itself too, because I've sold 4 books in the last little while. The third one is very much not cosmic horror. It's, I guess, what we would call eco-fiction or cli-fi or something. I'm trying to resist calling it post-apocalyptic, because there wasn't really an apocalypse unless it was one of those very slow ones, which is coming out with ECW Press next year. So I guess that would, cli-fi, sci-fi, something like that. Solar punk?
Yeah.
I don't know. And the fourth book, which I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about, is a side quill of one of my existing short stories, which is another combination of that kind of cosmic horror as well as sci-fi. So, and then the next several projects that I have planned after this, we've got something on sub right now that is a sci-fi in a very definite post-apocalyptic dystopia, and with a fantasy aspect to it, because I don't see why you can't have magic in the future. And there's a pretty much straight up fantasy spy thriller. I don't know. And a couple of other things. I mean, it's very cliched. I'm so sorry to say that I'm very interested in genre distinctions, but I'm not very interested in writing things that fit neatly into a genre. I want to know how they came about and how people decided where the lines should be drawn, and where publishers and marketers and salespeople decide the lines should be drawn, and where authors and critics and academics decided the lines should be drawn, because I don't think they're the same lines. and I want to know why we refer to something like Star Wars as sci-fi when it's clearly also got fantastical elements that aren't explained by science or technology. And that's the kind of thing I want to write. I just want to tell the story and use the elements that I like to tell the story. And I think if I restricted myself to a single genre, I would be very unhappy. Although if a publisher wants to give me an enormous amount of money to do so, absolutely, call me.
Well, so that's interesting, because then you're able to, as you say, you're touching in a lot of different aspects of, as you say, like solar punk, or like that, eco science. How much of this is actually, I don't want to say like commentary, but how much of the work that you're doing is inspired by, things that you do in your day-to-day life, and how much of it is pure imagination?
More and more as I get older, I think the day job is starting to work its way into what I write. It was kind of one thing when I was doing my writing at school, and not just because I spent 400,000 years in school, but the participation of a student in what I guess you would call the world at large is different from a person who's being expected to do more than just learn and produce grades, right? So while students, of course, were affected by capitalism, I didn't really, it wasn't until I graduated and started participating in it that I was like, okay, so now I am a grown-up. I am making a paycheck. I have an apartment with houseplants. I have to look after them. What are my rights and responsibilities to the world at large? What do I feel like I could be contributing? What do I feel like I should be contributing? Why do I feel like everything is so transactional now? This is very different than when I was simply expected to, learn and study. And I felt like I was contributing in a different way, like I was contributing with potential. Now I'm the big rock at the top of the cliff, and, what useful work can I do with myself? And I thought, not consciously, I don't think, but I thought, what of this could be going into my fiction? In what way can my characters participate in the greater world around them? And what do they feel they owe to that world? And what do they feel that world owes to them? Again, the greater question of what do you keep private of those thoughts, and what do you put into your fiction, and what do you tell your therapist? Those are three different things.
And also, but you as a passion, and also you were able to work on this, is like, but you did bring up the therapy piece. How much of your writing do you actually consider therapeutic, that you can sit down and then you're able to say, do you feel better after that hour or so of writing things out, and you feel kind of like, wow, I'm glad I got that off my chest in a way?
I'd say a solid 50% Probably. And that's not the 50% that goes out for publication, because as I keep tweeting about like a broken record, writing and publishing are two different things. But there are definitely things I work on that I'm not interested in having published, but I do feel better after I write them. They feel necessary to write, and the people in these feel like they're saying necessary things.
So one part I remember you hearing in a previous interview that you were talking about that you didn't think that you considered your work a horror novel, correct? Was that?
Yeah, that is correct. And yeah. I don't know that I still do. It's I've been trying to read up on it. Funnily enough, actually, I'd like to throw a shout out to the Ladies of Horror Fiction, who actually gave me a grant this year to literally learn how to write horror. Because I don't consume a lot of horror media. I'm very scared of horror movies. I can't watch horror movies. I can't even watch some thrillers. They're too borderline to horror. I get scared and I stop being able to function. I can't watch horror TV. I can't play very, very scary video games. I don't read a lot of horror books. And it seemed preposterous to me that I had written a horror novel, because how do you write something you're not familiar with, kind of, you know? And I thought the intent of horror media is to scare the reader, is to make the reader feel fear and work through the problems in the media along with the characters, even though they're all feeling this fear. And I thought, well, I didn't write that. I don't want the reader to be frightened. I want my characters to be frightened. And someone pointed out to me, yes, but when you're reading, don't you feel what the characters feel? And I was like, yeah, maybe. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'll give you that one. Yeah.
And so, but also, do you feel as though that, unlike other genres, even though the publishing world likes to categorize and put things in boxes, is there a point once you kind of had discovered that fear itself is kind of subjective to the reader, and is that why you didn't feel as though that you didn't consider your books as horror, for instance?
I think so. Yeah, and of course people are correctly pointing that out as well, is that what scares one reader won't necessarily scare another reader. So even though it's classified as horror, one person's going to laugh it off because, that's not scary, and the other person's going to feel that fear. So it's the subjectivity of it too, I think, was, well, I'm sitting there going, well, there are, this makes me feel uneasy, but I don't think it's scary. But of course, there are people who are writing me and going, okay, I can't sleep now. Thank you. Sorry.
So we have some people that listen to this, that listen to watch this, who are aspiring artists, writers, and people that are looking at to get a book published and things like that. So, and you mentioned earlier how you got published, but what's some of the advice? Specific writing advice. What are some of the advice that you would give budding authors who are wanting to get their manuscript published?
Good question. And I know a lot of people steer away from writing advice because one piece of advice isn't going to work for everybody. But I can say from my personal experience, what I've found most helpful is learning to finish things. And short fiction is really good for that. You can make a complete story arc, understand it, see its structure, in a smaller miniaturized form, and write the end on it, and then go back and start to edit. My problem previously, I think, was that I would just work on stuff as I felt like. And so I would end up with these enormous, terrible novels that you would have to save on 2 discs because they were so long, and they just didn't end. And I think beginning and ending a thing is probably the best education. And again, I always feel like I'm just blowing hot air when I talk about these things because I don't have any writing education. I'm self-taught books taught me how to write. So for aspiring authors, I guess I would just say don't give up. And don't give up means write the end on things. Get used to writing the end on things. Get used to sending them out.
So I know I'm not going to ask you the question of like who your favorite authors are, but I want to because
Good.
There's plenty, I'm sure. But I guess my question do you remember a time when you looked, because as it's important as a writer, is as you see behind you, as a writer you need to read. That's the best way to be, as you say, to be a good writer is to read. Was there any do you remember any point where you saw something like, oh, I love how this author described something, I want to use that? Or is there a point where he's like, I loved how this author did that turn of a phrase, or totally did a switch, and that kind of made you say, I want to put that in my next book?
Yes, God, I love when that happens too. It feels like a breath of fresh air, and you just kind of rock back and you think, oh my God, how did they figure out how to do this? When I was growing up, I read a lot of Terry Pratchett, I think, as a lot of authors do, because it's very easy to get into something that has all those books. And I was always struck by the gracefulness of his stories, in which he strategically but very easily left things out and just let you figure them out. Not just in humor, where often the gag is, they show the setup and then there's a beat, and then they show the aftermath, which happens a lot in his stories, and you just have to infer what happened in between. And it took me years to figure out that you can extrapolate that to practically anything. And same with when I started getting into Ursula K. Le Guin, who writes very much in the opposite style of Pratchett, which is also, very educational. And you're reading her stuff and you're thinking, it's so spare. It doesn't have any filler in it. And God knows I like my filler. But she's very much a minimalist, and she gets to the essence of the story, and she doesn't handhold you through it. She trusts the reader to kind of make the connections that need to be made. And then I got into Umberto Eco, who is literally the complete and absolute opposite. He's a maximalist. And his prose is, I think, my favorite. How can you not love somebody who uses a page for a single sentence and just keeps stringing clauses onto it? And what he taught me is, again, that you have to trust the reader to know what you're doing, and you can't let them down if you set something up. If there's a structure that you build, it's not exactly Chekhov's gun, but if you build up a structure, it's got to have that last wall. It has to be full and complete, even if it takes a little while to get there. I think those three kind of were the big formative ones. And most recently, Nick Harkaway, who does things in his books that make me put down the book every once in a while and go, just how were you allowed to get away with that? How did you put that in a book and have it go through several levels of editing and like the acquisitions committee? And I mean, I'm not saying it's not perfect, because I happen to think both Gnomon and The Gone Away World are perfect books. It's just, how did you do that? It's so audacious. I love it.
So talk to us now about your writing process. Are you because I remember so for anybody, I would just say this is like, YouTube, you type in Premee Mohamed, one of the top videos on there is Premee doing a tour of her house, showing how she's everything set up. And it was fun because it's one of those things that you get to kind of get an inside glimpse of the work style and what you do. But for the listeners out there, how's your process? And it's almost like writing advice, but not, where it's like, oh, that's a good idea. Or how do you describe your writing day, I guess?
Yeah, and it's funny. I did a blog post about this a couple of years ago on my Curious Fictions page, and it was called something like, "Well, you write funny," and I was like, "Oh yeah, well, you write funny too." But it was about writers and their process and their space. Kind of, I'm so nosy. I want to know what all my friends' writing spaces look like and what they're writing on, and do they have like any secret talismans on their desk, and do they have like a calendar, and do they have a calculator, and so that was really fun to do, and it was fun to do the tour too. So I guess my writing process is like in terms of like time. So I have a day job. I go to my day job during the day. When I come home, which is always now because I've been working from home during the pestilence, after supper usually is when I get going on whatever it is I'm working on. And I guess that's the whole process. If anyone's interested, I do most of my work in Google Docs and the rest in notebooks. I'm one of those writers that actually uses the pretty notebooks that people give me and that I buy. I'm not one of those ones who's like, oh, this is too nice to use. I'll be like, yeah, was too nice to use, haha, and go and ruin it. I find if I get stuck, that switching from one format to the other really helps jar me loose, and that's kind of a fun feeling as well. It's like your truck is stuck in a ditch and you're trying everything, and all of a sudden it just leaps out of the mud. I guess in terms of actual process, it depends on what I'm working on. So short stories, I usually have an outline of at least 4 or 5 points, which I usually put in one monitor. And then in the other, I'll open up a clean document and start drafting. And if there's research or anything that needs to go in there, or interesting facts, or if I come up with a bit of dialogue during the day or something, that's usually in the outline document, and then I'll write in the other one. And for novels, it depends on what I'm writing and how involved it is. So usually what I've been doing for the past, 5-ish years is, and I apologize, this is a Zodiac stereotype. I start a spreadsheet, and on the one side, it'll just say something like, note, and then I'll just write down what I want to happen in it. And I'm finding this is really helpful for the thing that I'm going to be working on next, because it's several timelines kind of shuffled into each other like a deck of cards. So this is the first time I've ever actually had to color code the spreadsheet to keep everything straight. But I find the spreadsheet's really good because it's easy to take things out and put things in, and you don't get screwed up on the order in which things happen, because I think we've all had that thing where you're drafting something and you get to the end and, your agent reads it or whatever, and he comes back and is like, so how are these two having a conversation? They haven't met yet. I'm like, they haven't? Sorry, I'll be back in a minute. I will go fix that. So the outline just kind of helps keep things in the correct order, whether that's chronological or not, and it makes sure I don't leave anything out that I would like to put in, or anything that doesn't happen without being explained by something that happens before. Because the main thing that bugs me, I think, is in a book is where things do seem to happen out of nowhere. And that's one of those things where, again, if you read enough, you'll spot at least a couple. Oh, for some reason, Palpatine is back, kind of thing. And they don't explain why. But something that happened previously should explain what happens next. And I find the outline really helps with that. So I don't draft linearly usually. I just kind of go as the mood strikes me, but the outline helps me keep everything in the correct order so that at the end I can stitch everything together as needed.
Thinking about Star Wars again. So with you, so let me ask you this: because you work with a publisher, and has there been anything in any of the books that you've put out where they say you got to get, like, have they said you have to take this chunk out, or you have to remove this? Have there been anything of where they've taken out where you wish they didn't?
No, not yet. Well, no, because I expect it to happen, but So far, of the 3 books that I've gotten edit notes back on, everything's been pretty minimal, like fairly light. Especially for the first one, for Beneath the Rising. We had quite a tight timeline to turn that around so that we could get copy edits and line edits done. And, I got the edit letter back and I was like, is it going to be terrible? No, it took about a week. I think it also depends on the editor that you get and how closely their vision of what the story they would like to have looks like the story that I would like to have, which is, i.e., the one I wrote. So far, those seem to have been pretty close to each other, which I hope lasts.
And so one of the hardest things is like getting the editing piece. How often do you reread your story, reread your drafts before you send it off to an editor, or do you have friends that are beta readers for you who will say, "Hey, let me look at this preview"? How does that work for you from the editing perspective?
So I guess the problem there is that I spent so long writing for myself that I never actually picked up like crit partners or beta readers or anything like that. The other good thing, though, I think, is that my memory is so bad that if I set something aside for like a week and then read it again, I'm like, who wrote this? Who wrote this trick? And I go after it with the red pen. But usually my revision process for like a novel is something like first draft gets down on the page. Yay, first draft, good job. And then I'll go back and reverse outline it to see if there's anything really wonky, to see if the changes I made sense. Because, of course, you never stick to the outline. The outline flexes. The outline can take a hit, generally, if I'm writing. But then I reverse outline it to see if anything really sticks out in terms of flow or logic or, the car went into the river, but in the next scene, they're driving the car. Like, what happened? That kind of thing. Then I'll go back and fix those. So that's sort of pass 1. And then pass 2 is kind of going back and fixing all the mistakes that I made by doing pass 1. And then pass 3 is usually just cleanup, like typos, spelling. Does anything look really wonky? Is that a word? I don't care. I'm putting it in anyway, that kind of thing. So usually 3 passes, and the first one usually takes the longest, and then after that it's a bit quicker.
And have you ever had to, when your passover, so it's kind of like similar to the previous question, have you ever had to cut something out that you really liked, but you're like, you know what, I'm going to put this in and I think you have like a little drawer, right? You have like an idea drawer, if I remember correctly, where you would say, that's going to be a good story. I like that character, but this isn't the right story for this character. Does that happen?
All the time. Yeah. And I hate the advice, kill your darlings. I like the advice, set your darlings aside, because if you wrote something good and you sense that it's good and it feels right and satisfying, it feels like a darling. Maybe your darling is at the wrong party. Maybe they should go home, and maybe later they will be invited to something else. It's the pain of cutting out something funny but extraneous is also a publishing thing, definitely, because I'm like, if I had left everything, for instance, in the Beneath the Rising sequel, A Broken Darkness, if I had left in everything, all the trivia, all the side quests, all the bits of dialogue, all the anecdotes and stuff that the characters share, it would have been significantly longer than the first book, and I wanted them to be around the same length, sort of for consistency's sake. So yeah, I clipped all those out and I put them in a document called Scraps, A Broken Darkness, and that's how they hang out.
So let me ask you this. Now, because you signed a 2-book deal, are you allowed to make a 3rd book if you wanted to, or that belongs to the publisher now? How does that work? Like you say,
I am not sure. I think if I I'd have to look at my contract. I think if I randomly wrote one because I felt like it, they would get an exclusive first option on it. So if such a book existed, they would get to look at it first for some period. I don't remember how many days. And then my agent could send it to other publishers if they were interested.
Okay. Is that something, because you have such a fervent readership on the series, is that something where you're thinking, like, is this it for you? Is this the second book? Are you done with this story? Or have you let up enough seeds where you're like, I want to go that direction, or I really want to see what's happening over here? Or is this, I mean, obviously we only have so many hours of the day, but I'm asking on behalf of your readers, is that, is a Broken Darkness it, or is there?
I hope I have fervent readers. Thank you, readers. And this also goes back to when the book went out on sub in the first place. So I wrote, I'm at the time 20 years old. I don't know how to write a series. I actually don't know how to write a novel. I don't know how to write anything technically except lab reports and scientific papers. And so 15 years later or whatever, 16 years later, this novel is going out. And of course, it's written as a standalone because I don't know how to write a series. And my agent says, genre publishers, they really like series. I was like, oh yeah, good for them. He's like, no, let's pitch this as a trilogy. So what I'll do is we'll write a detailed pitch for the first book, which of course is done. The manuscript is done. And then I need you to write, it doesn't have to be super detailed. I need you to write pitches for a second and third book. And I was like, okay, well, and he's like, yeah, in a week. I'm like, okie dokie. So I quickly threw together something for the second and third book, which I felt, okay, well, the ending of the first one leaves it open enough for something to happen in a second one. All I was thinking about was the first book. So written as a standalone, pitched as a trilogy, the publisher bought 2. However, I personally feel that there is a third book, and it would be based on that original pitch that we did back in the day. And that to me would kind of complete the story, but I'm very cognizant that the second book also technically has to complete the story. So it's one of those things where you have to figure out how to write an ending that can either stop there or keep going, which maybe I succeeded. My editor will let me know. I'm still waiting on the edit letter for that book.
But you could. I mean, but you could kind of like go rogue and then just say,
yeah, I could.
And say, here's, leave it off as the cliffhanger, and then.
Yeah, the third book has an outline, and it could be a thing, and it makes sense based on what came before. So if people want to give me cash money dollars.
So Premee, this has been great. We're wrapping up our hour, and real quick, so give people a bit of a summary, if you can, without giving away any spoilers on what people expect from your sequel book.
Yeah. So as I think I mentioned on Twitter, I actually don't remember writing it. I narrated it, ran through and sent it off to my editor, like, oh, this is your problem now. But in general, I think what I wanted to do was kind of springboard off the, I guess, not tremendously or not perfectly happy ending of the first book, because, problems are solved, but also a lot more problems are created. And I think at the end of the first book, neither the main characters or the world have really gotten into the ramifications of what's been caused in the first book, what's been spun off kind of what looks like a very fortunate set of circumstances in some respects. And I also wanted to explore kind of the idea that in the first book, it's supposedly friendship and trust that wins the day. So what do you do when at the end of it, nobody trusts each other, right? So Johnny and Nick don't trust each other, and none of the other characters trust each other, and parents don't trust their kids, and siblings don't trust each other anymore, and the entire world, it feels like there's nobody you can really lean on or rely on anymore. You feel like you have to sort of close up and protect yourself. So that's very much where the sequel is coming from that place of, can this level of hurt and trauma and mistrust be overcome? So people are in slightly different circumstances at the start of the second book, and I did not want time to heal any wounds. Kind of, I wanted everybody to just be very, very raw and still very upset. And I wanted even things like, the governments of countries to still be very upset about things, and presented with a new or different set of problems. Now, how's everybody going to react?
Thank you very much. And for all of your, your avid readers and fan base, so the book is coming out, as we said, in March 2021. And where can people find you? People want to follow you and read more about you. Where can people find you?
I try to keep my website reasonably up to date with events and panels and classes and whatnot. So that's just premeemohamed.com. I'm sure in the show notes they'll show you the correct spelling. I'm also on Twitter a lot, at Premeesaurus, and on Instagram same, but I'm really bad at Instagram these days because it's, such a visual medium, and I find I'm not taking pictures of anything anymore because I never leave the house.
Well, this is great. And, Premee, this has been a joy talking with you. Your energy and your charisma is infectious, and it's great to meet with, talk to somebody who has such great creativity, who has incredible skill. And please, anytime you're writing something else and you want to just find a place to talk about it, you're more than welcome to come back. We had a great time talking to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Barney. This was really fun.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna hopefully I don't mess up speculative. Okay, I said it right. Speculative.
Yeah, I've been screwing it up all day, honestly, in my head, because someone on my Twitter timeline changed his profile to say something like speculative fiction author, and I was like, oh no, well that's